Hello everyone and welcome back to Critique Clinic, the video series where we give you advice on how to improve your miniature painting.
We've got some absolutely mega miniatures to have a look at this week, so let's dive in. Let's go.
Painted by Jim says, "Hi gents, I was wondering if you can give some feedback on Abaddon. Appreciate there's a lot here for you to pick apart, but if you could highlight areas that jump out to be improved, that would be great."
Jim, well done, mate. This looks absolutely fantastic. I think you've done a really exquisite job on this. And really, I think me and George were talking about it before we started recording the section. I think that anything we're going to say is only like adding a scattering of like sugar on the cake, so to speak.
We're like 95% there. This is like the last 5%.
It's really good, mate. And I think you've done a really great job with all the little details and things. I love the use of the Dead Primaris from the Be'lakor kit. Almost looks like the Drachnai, the sword that he wields, is like sucking the soul out of the body, which is quite cool.
Great continuity though, because
yeah,
even the painting of the flames being green matching the sword
it's great.
works really nicely.
Yeah, it's really good. I think like, again, cleanliness, really good, sharpness, refinement. Like there's no visible issues with like paint application from what we can see in the photo. As we said, like I think anything we're going to really comment on this is purely going to be like a tiny little addition to what we think. And I think for me, like the couple of things that jumped out, it's actually things that just the eye was drawn to, not because they're not painted well, but purely because they're just things that I think you could, the same amount of interest that you've embellished in lots of other little things and attention to detail, I think that the surroundings, which kind of leads on to what I'm going to say next, kind of need that as well. What I'm predominantly talking about is the just this column here. I understand it's a grey concrete or rockcrete column. That's perfectly fine. But I think that you can add interest to it with some tones and colours. Like, for example, if you maybe glaze some purple in some areas, the harmony purple to the green complement of red would really just add a bit of interest to the column. Like, you've got to think that you've done the same, pretty much. You've already, the interesting thing for me is you've already done it on the miniature because you've done it on the ground. That stonework is exposed to the elements, obviously. The pillar is exposed to the elements, obviously. So why would the pillar not have the same attention to detail and the same environmental change that the ground has?
Yeah, these look quite like lived in.
Yeah.
Whereas the pillar looks quite comparatively fresh.
Yeah, I think so. And I would say like the almost like the copper or brass banding around there, we can see you've done a bit of verdigris. I really implore you to just go out and look at brass or brass statues and look at the verdigris that's on them. I think that you've been really subtle with it, and it's the base and environment is always a frame to add the interest of where that model is set. And I think that you could really embellish it with a lot more attention.
It's hard to balance as well because sometimes like subtlety is the way to go.
Yeah, true.
Sometimes I think it can border on being a little bit too subtle to the point of it doesn't actually stand out and register.
Yeah.
I think, like you said, with like the verdigris, like I think having all of these rivets and stuff on here, that would have been a great opportunity to really go a lot heavier in some of those areas.
Yeah.
Just to add that visual interest.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's really for me, like that I think that you've done a great job with the base. I think there's lots of really interesting things. I like the little skull there, like with the shoulder pad and all that kind of stuff. It all looks great. I just think that you could add a bit more interest and depth to kind of like the column. I think like it's almost like a bit of a frame to Abaddon when you look at him. It's on one side. The other thing is, in George pointing this out, is the candles. They look great, and I understand it's quite cool that you've done some candles on the steps as well. I think that's really 40k and really kind of like fits the setting. The fact that you can they just look like they're balancing there, and if they've been there for a while, you'd imagine those candles have been there for a while. They're obviously the wax is gonna run down the candle, and what it will probably do is run to the bottom and create almost like a bit where it's stuck and created like a bit of a puddle of dried wax. So what you can do is you can either get like Yoo-hoo glue, or you can get like thick PVA. You can get various things to just basically join the candles to the floor. I
mean, what you could do is, even when you're actually sticking them to the base itself, put a little bit more glue on so that when you actually push it down and attach it, it's like squeezing the glue out around it, around the perimeter.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's like, it's almost like a visible air gap or recess shade kind of underneath it. I think that's just what makes them look a little bit like they're floating, not quite
not
fully
quite,
in contact.
100%.
Not quite blended in so much.
But genuinely, like I that is all I can really look at it and go, oh, those two things, I'd probably just do a bit more to that. And like one of them is just the pillar is a bit more opinionated. It looks fine as it is. But I just think that for such a large object that's almost a bit of a frame of Abaddon, just adding a bit more interest to it would be quite cool.
I think it speaks volumes, actually, the fact of most of the stuff that we're picking out here is more to do with the actual construction of the display base rather than the painting of the miniature.
Yeah.
Like the actual miniatures are painted absolutely phenomenally, like really nice, clean highlights. I love all the texture and stuff on the cloak.
Yeah, it looks great.
You've got like the free-handed Templar's cross on the
subtle orange on his face as well. Like the subtle OSL.
It's awesome.
It's not too much, not too little, not too much. It's great. You smashed it. So really well done. Like it's a really phenomenal piece, really presented well, and really great refined painting. So well done.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for submitting. We'll look forward to seeing what you paint next. If you're listening to this podcast, then there's no doubt that you're looking to improve your miniature painting skills. And what better place to start than to learn techniques directly from industry professionals with the Siege Studios Patreon. As a member, you'll gain access to our entire catalogue of masterclass video tutorials with exclusive content going far more in depth into painting techniques than you'll find on YouTube, hundreds of easy-to-follow step-by-step PDF tutorials, and the ability to get dedicated video feedback on your miniatures so you'll always know what skills you need to improve next. Plus, tons of other additional benefits, all bundled for the same cost as just a few pots of paint. So what are you waiting for? Take the next step in miniature painting and improve your skills by heading to patreon.com/Siege Studios. Angry Raven says, hey guys, as a way of practicing, I'm currently halfway through doing a Marine from each chapter, each Marine trying to improve on the last, focusing heavily on the power armor and the different techniques involved with that. I've seen clear improvements on the way, but I would like your feedback on how to push them further. Well, firstly, I really like the idea of painting kind of multiple iterations
100%.
of the same miniature. And when I say that, I mean Space Marine, repetitively, different color schemes, focusing on improvement. I think that's a really great exercise to do.
Yeah, it's a good way to train the eye to shapes and understand it, whilst also changing the color on every one. So you're learning the use of different colors and also how they behave and all those kind of things. So it's a really good little exercise. So it's I
guess naturally improving your brush control over time as well, because you're getting more familiar with the shapes.
Yeah,
like, when it gets to things like edge highlighting and whatnot, which we'll obviously speak about. My first sort of overall thought on this, aside from it being like, one, very, very clean overall, fairly sharp, I would say as well. Everything's blocked in nicely. I'm not seeing any like crazy amounts of bleed or anything like that. It's great to see that you're actually advancing on with your painting as well. I mean, I know you've entered miniatures for previous episodes of this show, but seeing now that you're getting down to the point where you're adding like glazed volumetric shading, multiple stage edge highlights, I think that's really, really nice to see. Getting a lot closer to the box art finish.
It's really good.
My first kind of initial pet peeve, I guess, that jumped out to me was actually in regards to kind of the shading. So if we look at the leg, for example, we've got some nice controlled recess shading in all of these sort of deeper recesses and crevices on the armor panels. But when it gets to the shoulder pad, we've got a very, very thick, wide recess shade, which is kind of out of scale and continuity with the rest of the armor.
Yeah.
So the way that I would treat Space Marines is you really want to paint everything to the same standard and quality, irrespective of kind of where it is on the model. And especially with the shoulder pad, where it's an upward facing edge that's catching a lot of light anyway. This to me, quality, frankly, of recess shade in comparison to when we're looking at like the leg over here, for example, is it stands to be improved. So, and what I mean by that is just narrowing down the width of this, because you can see it's effectively about as wide as the trim.
Yeah.
And what that means is that kind of at arm's reach, the trim's looking a lot wider than it is, and you're lacking that nice bold contrast of the really bright edge highlight directly next to the black trim. You're losing that contrast because now you've kind of got a graduation, and what would be a really nice bold defined line to bring out that trim and show it off as a detail now gets lost, because directly next to it you've got a very, very dark color similar to the black, and then you're moving into the red, so it kind of loses some of that punch.
Yeah, I think it's just brush usage. I think potentially there's not so much of the point being used because it's quite a square brush stroke for that pin shading or that shading that you've done. You probably use the brush a bit flatter than more elevated and angled directly to the object. So I'd probably recommend just really trying to paint those inner recessed panel lines on the shoulder pad, just with the point of the brush, and just try and
exactly as you have done for other areas of the model. You've definitely got the brush skill to do it.
100%. Yeah. moving on from that, like the thing that I wanted to kind of just bring up is just like really well done. Like George has already said, you've entered several models and obviously done like some really cool models to date. It's good to see you progressing, as we mentioned. I think the thing that I really like the look of is that glazing on the shin that you can see. His left leg or the right one on the screen, the glazing is really nice subtle transition on there. But if we look at the one on his right leg, or the left on the screen, you can see some of the joins or between the colors where they're not fully glazed or blended together. And it's not so much a technical ability thing, because clearly the right leg demonstrates you're more than capable of doing it. I think it's just a consistency thing, and it's about looking at each part of the model individually and going, cool, are they rendered the same way, if that makes sense?
It's just having that patience as well.
Yeah, and the other thing that I noticed, and it does not kind of nod back to the pin shading thing that we're talking about. Obviously, if you have a look at the gorget, which is this piece of raised armor that protects the neck of a Space Marine, the bleed in this area, it's a tricky area to paint. I will be absolutely honest about it. It is, but then you've got like this, it's bled down onto the flat of the front of the chest. And it's just a case of just really being delicate, again, using that point of the brush and controlled application to just follow the curvature of this gorget and then not get the bleed into this part here. Really picky, but obviously you want feedback on how to improve it. It's just about just being a bit more refined with the actual execution of it.
But if you have made that mistake, there's no reason you can't go back in with the red base
No,
coat
100%.
color and just try and bring out some of this flat of the chest plate as well, and maybe just cleaning up some of this neck on the gorget as well.
All painters will cut in with the previous base color like into edges if they're a little bit thick. Sometimes like it's not like a negative. There's
you haven't got to get it perfect.
There's no diminishment in your ability as a painter because you've got to do a bit of cutting in. Like it's no different from painting a room. But yeah, I definitely recommend you do that. So yeah.
Yeah, and just one final note on the sort of continuity thing. These little dot specular highlights that you've done, I think are really nice. They're to scale. They're nice and tidy. But again, just a continuity thing. I think that these are lacking in certain areas on one side of the body where they're not on the other. So what I mean by that is on the hip plate here, we've got a nice controlled specular dot highlight on all corners of this panel, and then we look on the other side, we're lacking that here and here. And then similar with the sort of leg, we've got some dot highlights along the bottom here where I would actually expect there to be perhaps less of that because they're less prominent areas. Whereas we've got a very, very stark, harsh edge on the top of the knee that would be catching a lot of light, and very, very sharp object as well with very, very basically 90-degree angles. So I'd be expecting a dot highlight, here and here on the leg, on the foot plate, like here on these really, really sharp corners. So I would look for, when you're placing these highlights, don't just consider angle to light. Consider the extremity of the angle of the shape. If it's a subtle curve or edge, it might reflect a lot less light. Whereas if you've got a really, really harsh, sharp, 90-degree angle, that's a great opportunity to pick out that detail and make it look even more sharp, even more refined by picking it out with those dot highlights.
Yeah, and the last thing we'll just chuck in just to talk about it really quickly is, again, your edging over the model looks really good. There's a lot of improvement in the edging from other previous pieces that you've done. But if we have a look at the gun casing here, for example, there's just a bit where some of the edges blur into each other, and you've got this edge here on the lower part of the casing that just raises as it goes away towards the center of the gun. It's just about, again, consistency and just really looking at it and going, cool, are the edges the same sort of thickness? Are they the same? Like, are they all straight? Are they all defined? Those edges on the gun casing are tricky, like all cards on table. I think you've done a great job. I just think it's the magic R word, and it's just about refining them and just developing your control and pressure management. But you've done great. All right.
Yeah, and again, if you do make that mistake, there's no reason you can't go back in with that base coat color. Cut in or paint over it and just give it another try.
Exactly.
Some amazing really are nitpicking here. It's great to see your painting has progressed quite significantly. So we look forward to seeing the next Space Marine and how you've improved on that one. Danny says, "Hi guys, love the content. Below, I have my work in progress on my dwarf. Any advice on how I can make this look better would be much appreciated."
So a really cool little dwarf that you're working on, really lovely little miniature, which is ace. I think really well painted overall, like really clean, which is great. Shows a lot of ability with the brush, which is really good. And we know that the shield is not done. I did obviously note that you said that, so we won't be commenting on that. But I wanted to talk about his beard and hair. I wasn't sure whether it's supposed to be grey or white or black with highlights. And I think one of the things to be conscious of is that when you're trying to make hair look a colour, you still need to keep essentially the dominant tone that hair is supposed to be. And any highlighting that you do on it is purely an accent to show light hitting it or to show like a difference in tonal variance on it. I think if it's supposed to be black or grey hair, I think you've put too much white into it. If it's white, I think the opposite of that, there's too much darkness, like in between, like those strands of hair. Obviously, I know the sculpt has the recesses that it has. However, hair is obviously super, super fine. You wouldn't get a recess unless it was plaited really, really tightly with loads of little plaits. I know that's got obviously some plaits in it, but what I'd actually recommend that you do in place is just make some of the recess shading on it, if it's supposed to be white or a light grey, a bit softer, just that there's no confusion in the readability of it. Like
we've got two extremes here. Obviously, we're going all the way from black to white. There's a lot of room in the middle to work with.
100%, yeah. So I would just consider that potentially, because like I said, and just really keep the majority dominant tone inherently of what the hair actually is.
Yeah.
So as the main readable thing of it, so it clearly goes, oh, it's grey hair, or it's black hair, or it's white hair. I think that's
it's a commonality we see with black. Actually, funny enough, I'm not sure if this is meant to be black or not, but with black in general, we notice a lot of people tend to go really, really super bright with the highlights.
It takes away from the black,
and it does, because people tend to ignore tones and nuance of color within there. Like, if you want black to have a lot of depth and reflectivity, there are other tones within it. We often use like blues and things like cold colors, to kind of bring that out. But when you go all the way from like black to gray, you're really, really desaturating it. You actually bring a lot of the life out of it.
Yeah.
So if this is meant to be black, I would actually be highlighting it with much, much more subtle grays that are darker overall, and perhaps with a little bit of other colors and tones in them, like blue, purples, things like that. And then vice versa, like you said, James, if it is meant to be more gray, I'd be starting with a much grayer mid-tone, and then shading that down with darker grays, not going all the way to black, highlighting up with lighter grays, not going all the way to white, and so on.
Exactly, 100%.
One of the other final things that I just wanted to sort of make note of is actually the gold. I like the gold. I like the color choice. It's highlighted fairly sharply as well. It looks really clean. But I think visually overall, it's very kind of samey.
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of opportunity missed to pick out some other interests, because details like, for example, the sort of comb attachments in the braids of the beard. Because they're literally the same color as a lot of the surrounding objects, they get a little bit lost and they don't really stand out as their own detail.
No, definitely.
They don't really have room to shine, and you could potentially accentuate more of the details on the sculpt by adding a little bit more variation with the color.
No, definitely, 100%. I think just a bit of tonal variance on the gold, and you can do that with like either like brown acrylics, or you can do that with inks, or you can do that with like even shade paints. Just you take the most of the moisture off the brush and just do a quick skim with it, and it will just tone that area slightly darker. It's just about adding tonal variance to gold. I'd really recommend looking at on Google Images like gold objects and just seeing how much variance of tone there are on a gold object. Like search like gold shield or gold helmet or gold sword or something like that, and then look at the amount of tonal variance on there, and just try and copy what you see by placing tones and shadows on there.
Yeah, and it's not just that. I mean, you could even potentially just go off to slightly different shades of gold, or even just different metallics in general. Go to like a brass color, or maybe even silvers and things like that.
Yeah,
just to spice it up a little bit and just add a little bit more visual variety, because there is only really sort of three predominant colors kind of on this model, and especially where you've got the cloak, which is that kind of cream color, very, very similar in tonality to the gold.
It's got a lot of similarity to the metallics, and then that's the thing with the totems is you could do, George said, you could do some silver, you could do some different colors just to break it up and add interest to those.
Yeah, but otherwise, really, really nicely painted overall. Very, very clean, neatly blocked in. There's no like visible bleed or anything. Even painted the eyes really, really nicely with that shading around. It looks fantastic overall. Just some little tweaks and improvements that hopefully push it up to the next level. Zabriel, who previously submitted for Critique Clinic, has said that he's put some of our tips into action, but he'd appreciate some further advice on how to paint purity seals in particular. And we're just going to go over this and see how he's improved.
Okay, so first things first, a huge improvement from your previous submission. So got to say, massive congratulations on that. The plus points, we'll do that first. Weathering looks really good. I think you've really captured a gritty feel, which is great. Shows a lot of control with the brush, which is really good. And that control that I've mentioned will come in really useful for the thing you're asking about, which is the text, and we'll talk about that. Well done on like the cowling on the power fist. So like the shield on the power fist, the freehand on there looks great. I just try and make those squares as concise and the same size as possible. I think that the more you can get them consistent in size and shape, the better it's going to look.
I think that's just going to be a practice thing at this stage of,
definitely,
being a bit earlier on in the journey and just trying to
definitely.
refine those skills. But it's great to see. I mean, overall, there's certainly a nice visual addition to the model.
No, it's really good.
Yeah.
And that sort of brush work is what's going to really help you develop your brush control and the manipulation of the tip of the brush and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, all that stuff translates, like practicing freehand and stuff like this does trickle into other areas. It's not like you're just practicing your freehand, you're practicing your brush control overall.
Yeah.
Which will translate to all areas of the model.
Yeah, 100%. So just to tackle the purity seals, I think the first thing, and George pointed this out, is that the purity seal, the actual paper part of it, is very similar, if not the same, in color as the armor of the Terminator. And one thing that I think would really lend itself well is if the parchment was brighter, so that it reads more like a bit of paper, especially when you've got the armor in like a bone kind of color. I know a lot of purity seals that you see on miniatures on box art models are like that bony kind of tone, like that sort of vanilla cream kind of color. When you've got a model that is that color, you need a higher contrast value on those objects to the bone armor, if that makes sense. So
just to make them stand out, they get a little bit lost.
100%. So if you look at the one that's on his left shoulder that goes across the body, it almost looks like it's part of the armor as it goes across the chest. That's why just increasing the brightness of it and just changing the tone of it will help massively. Leading on to text, it is tricky. All cards on table, like it is, and it is all about using the tip of the brush. The pleasing thing and I think the thing which really gives like a lot of confidence in your ability is the fact that you've done all that intricate weathering on the armor. It's very similar, the actual brush usage, the control of the brush for doing the weathering as it is the script. And what you want to try and do is paint the lines and almost think like the best way for me to explain it is imagine I'm sure you've heard Morse code before in your head, but imagine as you're doing it, you're thinking Morse code, and every time there's a noise and the gap is where you'll lift the brush off the model. So you'll do almost like stippling to an extent. And if you've got that, I'm not going to do the Morse code noise, but if you think of the Morse code noise in your head and you move the brush as you're doing that, it also helps you to break up the line and also add a variance and interest to the text.
Yeah, I think trying to think of it more, try to get away from concentrating on the sort of wiggly line and just think about painting a line.
Yeah.
And my biggest tip for this is always try and have as minimal contact with the surface as possible. Try to be really, really delicate when you're literally just barely kissing the surface, because that's what's going to give you the finer, sharper line. It's just that reduction in contact and pressure.
Yeah.
So just trying to be really, really delicate, and like James said, kind of, actually pulling your hand away from the surface as you're touching it, and that's what's going to give you that kind of broken line that looks a lot more similar to text.
The other little tip that I'll give you on it as well is not just to do horizontal lines. And what I mean by that is once you've done the horizontal lines and you painted them on, do a second pass, but then add some tiny little upward and downward marks to those little marks, those lines you've done, and it will give you obviously with calligraphy or writing, you have letters that go underneath the line and above the line. So by doing that second pass, once you've done the broken lines, you can then add little bits of interest to tiny little sections of it to break up the overall look, so it doesn't visually look like it's just broken horizontal lines. You've got some ups and downs just to literally add visual interest to it, and that'll ultimately, I always say, your job's to trick the eye to make someone believe it's something that it isn't. You're just making it read as text would appear. Google Images is your best friend. Look at old parchments, type in like medieval scripture, all that kind of stuff. You'll find reference that you can then look at and try and do that on the surface of the model, and that will really help you with your sort of script and text writing.
Yeah, for sure. But overall, I mean, this is a massive improvement on the previous submission, so it's really, really great to see. So just more of the same,
Keep going.
At this point, it is really just about getting in the hours and practice and repetition. But yeah, really, really lovely improvement. So it's great to see that, and we'll look forward to seeing what you paint next. Plastic Paddy is back, and he says he'd love some feedback on this guy. Hopefully you can see a little bit of progress.
So first things, Paddy, you've done great improvement from the previous miniature, which is a chaplain that you submitted. Really, really well done on the cleanliness on this model. We're obviously going to give you feedback on how to just turn the dial a little bit more and obviously refine stuff. But there's a really great demonstration of kind of like improvement across the miniature, which is great.
Just overall sharpness, I think. Yeah,
really, really well done. Like things like the lens on the helmet, you've got that lovely kind of like red aquila on the chest, all the edging on those individual parts.
Really sharp, all of the highlighting on that.
Yeah, it's really great. So well done. Like your brush controls come on leaps and bounds. I think some of the things we're going to say are potentially more opinionated than factual, purely because like there's nothing.
They're more about kind of choices.
Yeah. There's nothing really like wrong, and I hate using that word with the miniature. starting with like the gold. The gold looks great. It's blocked in really nicely and cleanly, but I think it looks a bit flat. I think you could do with like maybe adding like some tonal variants, some shade into it, and then obviously highlighting it as well. I think that would just add a bit more to it.
Well, I mean, you could check out. We've got some tutorials on the channel for painting. I think in particular the Emperor's Children miniatures. Look at how we've kind of approached the trim on all of that, and the way that the shade is actually applied to add a lot of depth and contrast to that. It's a lot simpler and quicker than you might guess as well.
Yeah.
It will just crank things up a lot for you, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing I was going to say is like, and this is purely an opinionated statement, is that like I understand totally why you've used grey to edge the model, but then where it gets a little bit lost is if you look at all the rubberized or the black carapace or the underneath armor, so the ribbed armor, that's obviously grey as well. So visually, what it does is it makes it look like it's armor as opposed to a different material. And remember, we always say that like your job is to deceive the eye to make someone think it's something and it isn't, as in a different material, whatever. I would really probably recommend that painting maybe the armor. If you're going to choose grey for the armor, I would probably use other tones. You don't necessarily need to use blues and things if you don't want to, but like I would use other tones or colors just that are not grey, that would then be used to highlight the ribbon, so that you basically have a bit of a visual difference of interest between those two different materials. You've got the ceramite, and then you've obviously got the undersuit.
It's a crutch that we see a lot of the time, is people go, I'm painting black, so this is my black recipe. I'm painting grey, so this is my grey recipe. Yeah. It's just the same everywhere. So even if you wanted to be the armor, even if you wanted the armor to be black and the undersuit to be black, there's no reason you need to use the exact same paints and shades and colors.
Correct, yeah.
To do that. You could make for example, you might expect the painted ceramite to be brighter, more reflective, therefore bolder, brighter contrast, whereas the undersuit ribbing, quite dull, quite flat, rugged, maybe a little bit more worn. So you might want to be more subtle with the highlight choice.
Yeah, you could use like khakis, or you could use like dark greens, or almost like black greens kind of colors, and then that would keep the black green would work quite well with the other green tones that you've got on there.
Or even just overall darker greys.
Yeah.
You know, just you don't need to go as high on the contrast necessarily.
Yeah.
Because the lack of contrast creates contrast in comparison to the armor.
Correct. Yeah, 100%. But I said overall, really, really good. Like I said, the model's like really well painted. I think it's a vast improvement from the Chaplin. Line weight is a lot more consistent as well, which is great. And again, really great use of colors. You've obviously got the contrast in red and green on there. I'd probably lean into that a bit more as well as a bit of an opinionated statement. Black obviously is quite a dominating color of this piece, and really you want those greens and reds that are really punchy and rich to then be a bit more visual. So just look at where you can use it potentially on the model to add a bit more sort of like contrasts overall.
Yeah.
But really well done. Looks great.
I think to give you perhaps something to aim for next, as kind of the next steps of what I'd be looking to improve, like brush skill wise, would be perhaps adding some additional brighter highlights to some sharper, more prominent areas of the armor.
Yeah.
So, for example, where we've highlighted this sort of part of the leg panel here, it's all one flat grey across, which is great. But I would then go in with a second stage of an even brighter grey and just pick out the upper facing edges. So like the top of the knee, where it's a very, very sharp, harsh angle facing light. You'd expect that to be a lot more reflective. Tip of the sort of foot plate here, maybe like tips of the fingers, very, very top of the backpack. Just going in with that second stage and adding an additional highlight. It doesn't take a lot of time as well. It's actually going to be much quicker than the first pass of highlights, because you're covering just less surface. But particularly trying to draw interest to areas that need it. So like the helmet and the face, that's kind of like your focal point, right?
Definitely.
So just spending a little bit of time with some brighter greys and just going in and over the top of the previous highlight, not the whole width of the line, but just some of the sharper corners, and just picking those out with a brighter grey might add a lot more sort of contrast, visual interest, and just kind of start putting you on a bit more of a path to leveling up the painting and your other painting as well.
But overall, fantastic. Really well done. I think you've done a great improvement from the previous submission, and just keep pushing as hard as you are.
Well, massive thank you to all of our patrons for submitting for this episode of Critique Clinic. If you'd like some feedback from myself and James on your miniatures, then check the link in the description of this video to our Patreon. And over there, you'll also gain access to hundreds of high-quality PDF tutorials and our new video tutorials as well, which are extended. We also have podcast benefits, ad-free episodes, all that good stuff. Tons of awesome benefits for just the price of a few pots of paint. So check the link in the description for that. Otherwise, a massive thank you for watching this episode, and we will see you on the next one.